Everyone needs a little bit of validation in the morning. So thank you all again for being here. I hope you had a wonderful day yesterday. For those of you on the tour, you had a wonderful evening. We had sunsets. I didn't go, but I did hear this. I had it walking or doing something else, but we had sunsets, full moons, great conversation. So again, thank you all for being the people you are and talking to each other in important ways. I don't have much of an update today. The conference dinner, unfortunately, is full. So if you wanted to sign up, that's not possible. If you are coming, get the information from Alba today. Everything else is going to run as planned, and I think that's about it. So hope you have a good day. I'm going to wait another minute or two just to make sure everyone gets a chance. But Dave, actually no, let's get started. Yeah. Alba, Marta, sorry. If you want to.
It's a compliment. Yeah. Alba is doing a great job.
Yes. You are too. So you are too.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and just reinforcing what Philip was saying. Thank you for liking my hometown. I hope you had a great time yesterday. I was saying that the colors are unbelievable. Every time that I go abroad, then I come back and I go to see all the yellows and oranges that we have. So thank you for being here again. So today, now we will have David, that you know, of course. He will be speaking about responding to planetary change, what role for the social sciences in the Anthropocene. He, as you know, is professor of environmental policy at the Open University. He gave a small presentation yesterday also about university. He's teaching and researching sustainability and environmental policy. And he began his career specializing in international forest policy. He has several books written about it and about sustainability. He's also published on climate change politics, geoengineering, the democratic regulation of transnational corporations, and other topics related with sustainability. So I welcome you to the floor. I give you the floor, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marta, and thanks, Philip, for the introduction. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming along this morning. We should think perhaps of those who, for one reason or another, perhaps can't be here today, perhaps because of COVID, or perhaps because they've been denied a free university education. In my country, the United Kingdom, there used to be a free university education system, but in an act of intergenerational inequity, the government took that away, which I benefited from. The government took that away from people in 1998 and introduced student fees that are now extortionate. So that intergenerational dimension will feature in the talk this morning. And I'd like to look at some of the challenges that the Anthropocene raises for society and for the social sciences. These are challenges that already affect everyone on the planet. We'll look at two sort of approaches for dealing with environmental change that have emerged this century. For dealing with anthropogenic change. So this is Paul Crutzen. How do I do this? It's not changing. Let's try that. Spence, it's not changing. Sorry, I've got this is a very PowerPoint-rich presentation. At least I hope it will be. But I'm having difficulty changing slides at the moment. Technology problems. Part of the problem of environmental degradation. That's it. We're in business. That's Paul Crutzen. Many of you will recognise Paul Crutzen. He's the climate atmospheric scientist credited with coining the term Anthropocene, the expression used to denote that we're now entering a new geological epoch where humans, we ourselves, are now the dominant force for planetary change, and future generations will be able to find the traces of our civilization in the geological record through plastics, radioactive isotopes, manufactured metal alloys, and so on. And I think the Anthropocene is a term that denotes both our power and our impotence. Our power, because we've been able to transform the planetary biosphere without really wanting to, but we've done it, and our impotence, and that we seem unable to fix it. We seem unable to agree now what is to be done. And the Anthropocene should be seen as a no analogue state. Current and future environmental change is largely outside our knowledge and understanding. There is nothing we can compare it to in the history of the planet so far. This is a picture that I used in one of our international environmental policy courses at the Open University. It shows a power station. Who do we blame for anthropogenic climate change? Where does responsibility lie for switching on a light switch? Now, the caption above the power station suggests it is the energy companies who are responsible for carbon dioxide emissions. But then, if we look at the bottom here, it says almost half of the UK's carbon dioxide emissions are down to us. Okay, it suggests that the responsibility lies with the consumer, the individual decisions that we all make. So this raises questions on structure and agency. Where does the responsibility lie for carbon dioxide emissions? Is it the energy companies or the individual consumers? What about the oil and coal mining companies that are used to fuel energy production? What if the power station is owned by a foreign corporation that repatriates its profits? Where does their responsibility lie? What if the power is being consumed to manufacture goods for export to another country? So the point I'm making here is that responsibility for this problem of climate change is differentiated amongst many actors. It's a transnational problem. Although it might seem to be one of just power generation at the top and consumption at the bottom, in actual fact, climate change is normalised into the way that we all live our lives. And we need infrastructural change from the current high carbon economy, the infrastructure of oil wells, oil refineries, petrol stations, motorised vehicles, to the new low or no carbon infrastructure based on other energy sources, wind, solar, wave, and so on. And we're making some effort to get there, but we're not moving fast enough. One does not need to be present in an environment in order to degrade it. This man in Niger, he is feeling the consequences of climate change. He bears the consequences of an action that he did not commit. Okay? Now, we shouldn't assume that this man's environment is degraded solely because of climate change, but we do know that climate change is increasing the incidence of drought, it's increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, such as hurricanes, storms, and so on. But this one image, I think, again, which we've used in our courses at the Open University, illustrates some important points. The relationship between nature and society. To what extent can they now be conceived of as separate entities? Or to what extent are they now, should we think of them as sort of an integral whole? The spatial separation of cause and effect. Cause and effect can be separated over space and time. Bruno Latour, who died last year, used the concept of action at a distance. Okay, we can act to affect environmental change in an environment that we may never have visited or may not even know about just by the actions that we take. So again, that brings to the fore questions such as the relationship between the local and the global. We made a film in Bangladesh some years ago about climate change in Bangladesh. And this is Nirupad Baini. He's a vegetable farmer in the Bangladesh village of Paitgacha, deep in the floodplains of the south. His environment has suffered salinisation since a cyclone in 1990 forced salt water off of the oceans and upstream, upriver, into what was previously a freshwater environment and which is now a saline water environment. And the scientists that I spoke to in Bangladesh have concluded that the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events in the country is now pushing the saline frontier northwards, and in a few decades, by the end of this century, it will have reached Dhaka. The rivers will no longer be freshwater, it will be saline. He's responded, Mr. Nirapadbaini has responded by growing saline-tolerant vegetables. Others in the floodplains have opened their fields to formerly rice paddies to saline water in order to farm shrimp. One of the questions I asked of all our interviewees in this place was, have you ever heard of climate change? And then we showed their responses one after another in the film that we presented to our students. We got varying answers. Some of our interviewees hadn't heard of it. Some had heard of it. Mr. Baini was the most eloquent of all. He has a level of understanding that is at least equal to the average person in the street, say, in the global north. He was an indignant yet highly dignified man. We were invited to eat with his family and we were treated very hospitably. But he was indignant that carbon dioxide emissions from the global north were causing environmental change in his environment. And he asked us to take home a message on how people in Bangladesh are suffering. And I promised him to do that. And so mentioning that today is part of me fulfilling my side of the bargain. I took this picture at an Extinction Rebellion rally in London in 2019. I love the ambiguity of that slogan at the top, Rebel for Life. Okay, it's both a noun, to be a rebel throughout your life, but it's also a verb, the act of rebelling, to rebel on behalf of the planet, to rebel in order to protect life. Okay, and that's the banner at the bottom. We are nature defending itself. Again, that relationship between nature and society is brought to the fore. We are nature defending ourselves. I'm a big supporter of Extinction Rebellion, by the way. I think they're one of the big progressive movements of our age, along with Me Too and Black Lives Matter. This is a progressive movement that stands for progressive change. Right, I'm going to look now at two big ideas that have emerged this century. Well, they've been around before, but they've come to the fore this century. And one is the idea of rights of nature, okay, that nature has rights. And the other is geoengineering, which is a planetary scale interference in the climate in order to reduce the net temperature. We'll look at these one by one, starting first then with rights of nature, or earth jurisprudence as it's sometimes called, an idea from South America, in particular the Andes Mountains. This is the United Nations General Assembly. Okay, I used to be a member of United Kingdom delegations to the United Nations Forum on Forests. Okay, and I would regularly go to New York and be a member of this delegation. And one day I heard that Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, was due to speak in the General Assembly. So I wondered whether my United Nations Forum on Forests pass would get me into the General Assembly, and thankfully it did. And I had the privilege, and it was a real privilege, to see President Evo Morales take to the floor, and he proposed this resolution, Resolution 63/278, that from henceforth, the 22nd of April, should be International Mother Earth Day. And what he said was, some 60 years, this is in 2009, some 60 years after the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it's now time to recognise a new set of rights, the rights of the planet, the rights of nature, the rights of Mother Earth. And I thought this was the first time I've heard of this idea of rights of nature. So I decided to go away and do some research on it. And this is what I found out. This is Christopher Stone, and the idea that nature should have rights in law was first articulated in the United States. It's a much older idea in South America, but in the United States, in Christopher Stone's 1972 paper, Should Trees Have Standing? Now, standing, or locus standi, is the Latin phrase, is the ability of a party to demonstrate to a court the right to participate in a court case. And Stone argued that trees should not be denied legal rights of protection simply because they cannot speak. He suggested that guardians, people like us, who wish to defend the rights of trees, should be able to bring legal action against those whose actions would harm them. He didn't argue that no tree should ever be felled, but he did say that sufficient individuals of a species, any species, should be left to enable that species to flourish in the wild. This is Thomas Berry. He, in the global north, he was one of the main proponents of rights of nature, and he argued that any component of the Earth community has three rights: the right to be, the right to habitat, and the right to fulfill its role in, as he put it, the ever-renewing processes of the Earth community. He writes of a great law in which the universe is the primary lawgiver. Rights originate, this is a quote, rights originate where existence originates. That which determines existence determines rights. So a river has the right to flow. Species have the right to continue to exist in the wild, and ecosystems have the right to adapt and evolve over time. And just to say, the emphasis here is not that humans give rights to nature. We don't have that authority, okay? We can recognise that nature has rights, but we cannot confer them. We cannot give rights to nature on which we depend. This is Cormac Cullinan. He's a South African lawyer, again, a major figure in the rights to nature movement. And he argues that effective nature protection requires not tinkering with contemporary legal systems, but a foundational transformation of the law. The law at the moment treats nature as a resource, as property over which we have domain. And that, he argues, needs to change. The law, he says, articulates a society's vision of itself and provides a normative framework that shapes human behaviour and establishes the moral limits of what is right and wrong. A jurisprudence based not on nature as resource and property, but on nature's rights, would reorientate how we behave in relation to nature, leading to a fundamentally different type of society. We can perhaps sort of make brief reference here to Robert Cox's distinction that we mentioned yesterday between problem-solving approaches and critical approaches, which think, outside the box, so to speak. So Earth jurisprudence is concerned not only with defining the rights of the natural world, equally importantly, it redefines our duties to nature and our relationship with it. Now, at present, when we recognise the effect of our behaviour on the natural world, we pass inadequate laws, don't we? We pass inadequate laws that don't really get to the core of the problem. Okay, it might curb an environmental problem of its worst excesses, but it leaves intact the systematic exploitation that lies at the heart of the problem. So there's a reversal here of rights in society. Instead of us being at the apex of the pyramid, and then us deciding where other rights should be allocated, nature's rights are at the top, and we can exercise, there'll still be human rights and rights of businesses and so on, but only to the extent that it doesn't interfere with nature's rights and lead to the degradation of the natural environment. So proponents of Earth jurisprudence argue for the subjectification of nature, as opposed to its objectification, where we treat it as an object when it suits us. Nature should be seen, on this view, as subjects with their own rights. Just as we are subject citizens with our rights, we should look upon nature in the same way. And treating nature as subject is to recognise its intrinsic worth. Our most important duty is to respect the earth, both from a moral standpoint, because it is right, and from an instrumental standpoint, because it's in our self-interests. Human rights flow from the earth, and only by respecting nature's rights can human rights such as those to food, water and health be fully realised. This is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the United States, there is no federal level recognition of rights of nature, but there are some places, Tamaqua Borough County is one of them, there's Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where jurisdictions at the sub-federal and even the sub-state level have passed ordinances that respect rights of nature. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is one of them. This is Rafael Correa. He was the president of Bolivia from 2007 to 2017. And in 2008, Ecuador agreed a new constitution. It's the first constitution to include rights of nature. Nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and occurs, has the right to integral respect for its existence. What happened there? Spence, help. That's all right. It's not my laptop, you'll have gathered, you know. Where life is reproduced and occurs, has the right to integral respect for its existence and for the maintenance and regeneration of life cycles. And you see it, that final sentence, to enforce the rights of nature, Article 71. Okay, that is the first constitution in the world to recognise rights of nature. This is Evo Morales, who the following year passed a law, the law on the rights of Mother Nature. He's one of the main proponents. He tried to put into existence a universal declaration on the rights of Mother Earth. What he did was that he convened this summit, a civil society summit, in which the people present. This is from that summit in Bolivia in 2010, in which they drafted a universal declaration of human rights. Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, which was then presented to the United Nations in the hope that they would adopt it. Sadly, they didn't. But the draft is still out there. And I won't be able to look at this, spend too much time on this, but I've done a comparative analysis here on Bolivia's law, some of the rights that exist and some of the rights that were in the Universal Declaration. And what you can see is that the Bolivian law on rights of Mother Nature inspired, to some extent, the Universal Declaration: the right to life and to exist, the right to pure water, clean air, the right to balance, to continue vital cycles and processes free from human alteration, the right not to be polluted. This is all good stuff, but it's still very tentative. Okay, it's relevant to an interesting presentation I went to yesterday by Rhett Martin, who spoke about sustainability constitutionalism, a new constitutional pathway. So this can be seen within the paper that Rhett presented yesterday. It's made tentative inroads into the United Nations. The expression rights for nature is mentioned, but only in political declarations. It has no legal force in international law, sadly. Okay, so we've got here a new jurisprudence which is based on the idea of, first, rights of nature. The right of each being is limited by the rights of other beings. Any conflicts between the rights of different species must be resolved in a way that maintains integrity, balance, and health. Pachamama, Mother Earth, is again an idea that comes out of the Andes in South America. The earth gives us life. It is the mother of all life. So the relationship between rights for nature and human rights is not one of equivalence. Rights of nature trump those of humans. Sorry, I didn't mean to use the word trump there, but you know what I mean. Buen vivir, oh dear. Buen vivir is an idea which means living good, living well, good living. It's not associated with standard of living in economistic terms. It's a spiritual component of well-being that includes cultural identity and community. There's a collective notion of property rights. Okay, nature as a commons, if you like. And it's a reaction against neoliberalism. And it's the way it prioritises the individual humans, individual businesses, and so on. Both Rafael Correa and Evo Morales have spoken out against neoliberalism. It's not reflected in their work on rights of nature, but they're both big opponents against it. So this is, if you like, a counter-hegemonic ideology. Right. It's not. Okay, here we go. All right. So from a proposal that seeks a value-driven change to the law and to environmental governance, to one in which humans are absolutely essential, a technocratic approach that wants to interfere in the Earth's ecosystems on a planetary scale in order to control the global climate. Now, there's two types of geoengineering. Are many people familiar with this idea of geoengineering? Yeah, okay, that's good. So there's quite a few. Geoengineering is interfering in the planetary ecosystem to lower the temperature of the planet. And there's two types: solar radiation management and carbon dioxide removal. So to just sort of make sense of that, climate change is caused by two main variables. One is the amount of sunlight that strikes the Earth's surface, and the second is the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it therefore stands to reason that if we're going to control the temperature of the planet, what we need to do is to do one of two things: either to modify the amount of solar radiation that strikes the Earth's surface and is then re-radiated as long-wave radiation, which is absorbed by greenhouse gases. That's solar radiation management. And the second is to lower the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases, and this is known as carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. Now, just to make sense of solar radiation management, it involves increasing the reflectivity, or to give it its right name, the albedo of the Earth. In other words, the extent to which it reflects incoming solar radiation. Now, albedo is mentioned on a scale of 0 to 1. 0 is a perfect black surface that reflects no light at all. It absorbs all of it. 1 is a perfect white surface that reflects all the solar radiation that hits it. It reflects it straight back. It doesn't absorb anything, 0 to 1. The Earth's albedo at the moment is about 0.31. And according to the Royal Society, if we could increase the albedo of the planet to 0.32, we would be able to bring climate change under control. So there's all sorts of ways in which this can be done. One is space reflectors, putting in giant umbrellas into orbit between, so that to reflect incoming sunlight. The other is to seed the atmosphere with reflective particles. The case of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines is useful here. This was a massive volcanic eruption in 1991 that led to a planetary cooling effect for 2 years, because amongst the matter emitted from Pinatubo was particulate matter, aerosols as they're called, that reflect incoming radiation. So that's the analogue, if you like, is getting more aerosols into the atmosphere in order to reflect sunlight. Okay, so moving on, this is Munch's painting The Scream under a blood red sky. It's been believed that perhaps Munch, when he painted this, was inspired by the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, which led to red skies in Europe. He first painted this in 1893, so that red sky is believed to have been inspired by a volcanic eruption many thousands of miles away. These are aircraft contrails, and what we see here is that when you get lots of these trails, they can reflect incoming sunlight. Okay, now the sort of uncontrolled experiment for this was September the 11th, 2001, when all flights in the United States and North America and many other parts of the world as well were grounded. So there were no contrails. And what it was found was that the temperature during those 3 days in continental North America was higher. It increased above and beyond what was expected from natural variation. So we know that aircraft contrails and other forms of aerosols in the atmosphere can reflect incoming solar radiation and have a cooling effect on weather and climate. So you couldn't make some of this stuff up, actually. It's even been suggested, this is an aircraft, as you can see. You'll see that there's two contrails coming out of the two engines on each wing, but there's also a third trail at the wingtips. And this is the release of aerosol matter in order to have a cooling effect. You literally couldn't make this up, only somebody has made it up, and that's why they've created this image, the idea that we can use aircraft to lower the temperature of the planet by making the contrails more effective than they would otherwise be. Another proposal is to have these machines going across the ocean, spraying seawater into the atmosphere to seed cloud formation and to make existing clouds more white than they would otherwise be, again, to reflect sunlight. And it's been suggested that we should start painting roofs of houses white, again, in order to reflect the sunlight. Now, the trouble here with all these methods is that it doesn't deal with the net carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. We still live in a high carbon dioxide world. Okay, but it's a cooler world. Now that, to my mind, is incredibly risky, that we would artificially cool the planet while leaving all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's never been a stage in the history of the planet when that's happened. A high carbon dioxide world in the past has always been a hot one. A low carbon dioxide world has always been a cooler one. So this is a pretty dodgy. The result is that people then argue we need to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which is sadly easier said than done. So this is a ship called the Polar Stern. This was an experiment carried out by German scientists in which they tried to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by seeding the oceans with iron and phosphorus particles to achieve increased oceanic uptake of carbon dioxide through enhanced algae and phytoplankton growth. And the results were inconclusive. It did lead to some uptake of carbon dioxide, but it tended to be released within a matter of weeks. It did not permanently remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Another suggestion for carbon dioxide removal concerns basalt aquifers. Underground aquifers with basalt rock. And the idea is that if you pump carbon dioxide into these aquifers, it will react with the water. It will form carbonic acid, H2CO3. So water, H2O plus CO2 gives carbonic acid, which will then react with the basalt and form carbonates, rock, that basically locks the carbon dioxide out of the system, out of the atmospheric system. These are the places in the world where there are basalt aquifers and where this could be possible. You'll see that Iceland is in the north there is almost entirely basalt, and there have been experiments conducted to this effect, and in Iceland, and what they found is that it can lead to removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and lock it away, but not on the scale that's going to have an appreciable change to the Earth's temperature. Is this the highway to the future? You'll recognise the wind turbines, but these little things in between the wind turbines are artificial trees. Klaus Lackner, formerly of Columbia University, now Arizona State University, argued that the wind would blow through these artificial trees and there would be a sorbent within them that would capture carbon dioxide but not other gases, and that would then lead to a stream of carbon dioxide that could be streamed underneath and stored out the atmosphere. So Klaus Lackner has said that a good sorbent is environmentally benign and can stand repeated recycling. He's estimated that if we can produce 10 million of these a year, then we can have a significant and appreciable effect on atmospheric carbon dioxide. 10 million a year, that might sound a lot, but he compared it to 73 million cars a year that we produce. So 10 million's not that much, really. But again, this is not really happening at the scale that's needed. So there's important questions here, political questions. What should we do? Should there be international agreement on geoengineering? Okay. Solar radiation at the moment is the more technically feasible, but as I said earlier, it's very high risk and on its own would result in a high carbon dioxide planet and the loss of marine life, because there would still be intense concentrations of carbon dioxide in the world's oceans, which would increase the acidity of the oceans and erode marine life. Carbon dioxide removal is certainly the most desirable of the two geoengineering techniques, but at the moment it's the least technically feasible, at least on the scale that we need to make an appreciable difference to the problem. So, important question, should we do this? Should we deliberately modify the climate? Should we deliberately modify the climate? Should we implement a global scheme that's internationally agreed, or should there be implementation without universal agreement? Should or could we prevent a country from taking unilateral action? And if so, how would we do that? This is Albert Einstein, who's used the phrase, we cannot solve a problem using the same level or type of thinking that created the problem in the first place. Again, a sort of more critical approach. From Albert Einstein to David Cassidy. Sorry about this. But David Cassidy, I grew up with David Cassidy, not out of choice. My sister would not stop playing him in the 70s. Him and Donny Osmond. I had no choice in this matter. He used this phrase, how can I be sure in a world that's constantly changing? Okay? And that is definitely the most epistemologically profound question ever posed by a 1970s teen idol. Okay? And in a sense, it makes the serious point. How can we be sure? The world is constantly changing. That changes everything. As our knowledge changes, what do we do? What do we do about that? Robin Eckersley, political scientist in Australia, has made the point that the creation of green governance is a never completed process because the world, our Earth is changing, so governance needs to change as ecosystems change. Okay, but it does raise the question of uncertainty, and it raises the question here of how we deal with uncertainty. It also raises the question of what our role is as educators. How should we respond to this? Okay. There's a distinction drawn here. I've been very influenced by the work of Paulo Freire and Richard Kahn on eco-pedagogy. Okay, they draw a distinction between two ways in which we can work as educators. Environmental education, our job is to increase public knowledge about environmental issues. We critically analyse different policy option choices, but we don't really take sides. We teach about politics, but without being political ourselves. That's environmental education. I'm sure we all do that in our teaching, in our classes. But eco-pedagogy is different. It is a political project that not just teaches about the problem, but increases the public capacity to respond to environmental issues as engaged and concerned citizens. It's critical about dominant power structures, and it is a political project with an agenda for transformative change. Okay, now that is, to my mind, I really, again, Robert Cox's distinction is useful here. Eco-pedagogy is a critical approach. Environmental education might be seen as more of a problem-solving approach. But I could just imagine what would happen at the Open University if I went to them and said, look, the Open University has not adopted eco-pedagogy. And if I were to suggest it, I can imagine the response from senior managers. Like I say, this will lead us, the university, into the realm of political activism and to accusations of political bias. We're a publicly funded institution. We should not be doing politics ourselves, but we should teach about it. We're educators, not activists. I'm sure that would be the response if I was to make that. And I don't know of any other university that has publicly endorsed an eco-pedagogical project. And if you know one, please do let me know. But I would just like to say, is it time for us as universities to consciously move into this particular space and to confront the big question that politicians are not asking and the media, with few exceptions, are not covering? And that is, how do we respond to this in a way that will give our children a sustainable planet? This is a cartoon that I used to teach students about uncertainty. You'll probably have heard of people say all these things. The Earth's climate's varied considerably over time. Why should we be concerned now? The climate's always changed. It's a hoax. We've all heard that one. The scientists can't agree amongst themselves. There's no real scientific consensus. And if the scientists are right, we could all end up extinct. But this guy at the front, he's confused. And I think a lot of our students identify with that. And we did a poll amongst some students at the Open University, and we found that 20% of students were genuinely confused. So that then leads to the question, how do we reach these students? How do we reach these students? People of goodwill who are puzzled by the contradictory claims they hear and who genuinely don't know what to believe. Many members of the public don't want to believe that climate change is taking place because they recognise how dreadful the consequences will be for their children and grandchildren. So I've done some thinking about how we can respond to this as social scientists. These are some of the people I've heard from. Paul Steinberg of Harvey Mudd College in the United States, in his book, Who Rules the Earth. He pushes back against the idea that teaching about the environment and adopting a political project would in some way be would in some way be wrong. He argues that normativity is the distinction between the normative and the analytical in the social sciences is a sloppy distinction. He argues all social science teaching, and all science teaching for that matter, is political and normative in one way or the other. We teach medicine at universities because we believe in human health. We teach engineering at universities because we want bridges, buildings and aircraft to be safe. There's a normative underpinning to all of our teaching. Making explicit our concerns with sustainability is nothing wrong, he argues. A more useful distinction to Steinberg is whether a researcher is committed to a public cause, such as caring for the earth, or a more narrow ideological and organisational agenda, such as increasing business profit, which underpins work in business schools. Peter Dalvin, University of British Columbia, he argues that we have a responsibility to expose the lies and duplicity of those in business and politics. He says we should avoid theory building for itself. Theory building is not good unless it has an impact on the external world. Richard Falk says we spend too much time serving the system. In the UK, we're encouraged to do this by a research excellence framework that focuses on our impact on user groups. Okay, we've got to identify the user groups that we're producing our research for. And we spend less time thinking of what actually needs to be done. I'm going to move on now because I've had the warning. And I think as educators, we need to ask the big unexamined question. Can we fully decarbonise the economy by moving to renewable energy sources, such as wind and solar, while energy demand continues to grow? Or does arresting climate change necessarily and unavoidably mean we must reduce our energy consumption to decarbonise the economy? How many politicians ask that question? I've not heard that question ever asked by politicians. It's not even something that you hear much in the media. Oren Young, political scientist, time up? Right, okay, I'm getting 2 warnings now. Dear me, this is peer pressure, but I welcome it. I welcome this. We need to respond in the collective interest to what our colleagues tell us, but not just yet. Oren Young has spoken of the Anthropocene governance gap. The old political systems, the old governance systems are still in place, but they're not responding fast enough. Basically, they're not fit for purpose. We have political systems that are not responding agilely and nimbly. And the new political systems are not yet emerging. So we have this gap between what we have and what we need. And on that, I wanted to mention Naomi Klein and the Green New Deal, but time's up. So thank you for your attention. Apologies for overrunning.
My colleagues are reading the microphone. Thank you, David.
Thank you. So we've still got 20 minutes, I gather. Sorry that I did overrun.
Good morning, Prof. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. There were so many gems there. I kept turning to my sides going, yes, 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 and that's very rare. I have one suggestion and then one question. Might I suggest the constitutional sustainability? In 1993, South Africa adopted sustainable development into its constitution. It was the first constitution to recognize that I have the right to live in a sustainably developed economy, and then gives its citizen the right to approach government, should it fail in that delivery, and take it to constitutional court, where I can be represented by a judge, and a panel of constitutional judges then make a reprimand to fix government's action on my behalf. So that's always an interesting one. But my question more is, considering the level of carbon reduction between the global north and the global south, and the great divide between north and south, and the only solution is to collaborate. Humans have been fighting that ability for a very long time. But more importantly, the political agenda, you referred to it at a university level and how we teach it. And the notion that academia is separate from policy is evident that that is no longer working for academia. And coming from a public university in South Africa, we are moving away from academia being separate from party. And we've actually been taught at a philosophical level that philosophy was derived from government. It was a form of governance in which scientific discovery was formulated and then split later on in academia. My question is, at what point in time will academia recognize that it is needed for political change in addressing climate change?
Malcolm, thanks for the question. Good question. Good point. 1993, South Africa. I didn't know about that. I'm going to make a note of that. Thanks. I mean, I do think it is an artificial distinction when that we should view governance, environmental governance, that the academy, we as scholars, we as teachers and researchers should see ourselves as shaping, the rules, norms, principles by which we all act. That should be our role as educators. It's not just to teach about a subject, but to bring the normative absolutely forefront, absolutely central. And certainly in the United Kingdom, that doesn't happen. Okay, as I say, there's focus on individual user groups, but not really educating the public about public welfare problems, and climate change is the defining public welfare problem of this century. How we deal with this will be the history, as I might have said that yesterday. The history of this century, which we won't write, will be how well humanity dealt with this. If I hadn't run out of time, I was going to talk about the Green New Deal, and I was going to mention your presentation yesterday. Because the Green New Deal is traditionally sort of imagined as taking place within countries. It's a Keynesian economic stimulus package to fund low carbon energy technologies and the transition away from fossil fuels towards solar, wind and so on. And also retraining people. So we need trained people. If we're going to move away from the fossil fuel economy, which we have to, there's lots of people that are dependent on that. To take just one example, ExxonMobil, look at the tremendous concentration of scientific and technical expertise in ExxonMobil. And what would happen if that expertise were to be harnessed in the transition to a low carbon economy? You know, think the good work that could be done there. But at the moment, it's all pulling in the wrong direction. The reason I was going to mention your presentation is that the Green New Deal is, as I say, normally conceptualised within countries. And what your presentation yesterday showed is that international aid and foreign direct investment from one country, and the example you used was the United States, in another country, in this case South Africa, can be used both to reduce youth unemployment by getting people involved in the low carbon dioxide economy, and at the same time reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And you produced the empirical evidence to back that up, and it made me realise that we should be thinking of a global Green New Deal and how the countries with the money and the expertise can help others. So I was going to give you that I was going to mention that either today or tomorrow in the closing ceremony, but I've mentioned it now. So thanks for your presentation.
Gracias. Voy a hacer uso de mi idioma para hacer mi comentario y ojalá alguien pueda traducir posteriormente. Tiene que ver, me da gusto que estén retomando estos temas con relación a qué opciones tenemos como planeta, ¿no? La geoingeniería, el trabajo social, pero ¿no será que otra vez estamos buscando discursos que nos resuelvan el problema? ¿No? Desarrollo sustentable, buen vivir, Pachamama, ecopedagogía, educación ambiental, y me parece que se nos está olvidando que lo que realmente nos va a dar muchas soluciones es mirar el contexto específico donde está el problema, porque seguramente no en todos los países se puede hacer geoingeniería, seguramente hay muchos lugares donde se hace ecopedagogía, pero tiene otro nombre y al final el buen vivir o sustentabilidad o los ODS o los SDGs, como le quieras llamar, no tiene sentido si no te enfocas en el contexto particular. Entonces, el tema no es el concepto que usamos, sino el problema que quieras atender. Entonces, las personas, los científicos, los políticos, las empresas no van a retomar un discurso que sale en el mundo global para llevarlo a un caso particular, no va a resolver nada. Entonces, mi pregunta es que no, lo que estamos fallando es el mirar a fondo lo local, el problema particular. Eso es mi pregunta, comentario. Por el otro lado, solo comentar. Sí. Gracias. El otro no es un comentario para organizadores. Me parece que ha sido un error dividir el programa en español e inglés, porque ni siquiera son tan caros los traductores simultáneos. A mí me hubiera gustado escuchar las ponencias en inglés y estoy segura que a ellos les hubiera gustado escuchar ponencias en español.
Okay, so my translation will be free, right? Because there's a lot of… So our colleague said that she's very happy that we are all discussing these topics related to sustainability. But she thinks that we should be more concerned about local solutions, about looking at particular contexts and particular solutions for different problems, because everyone has a different problem. She knows about all these geo solutions, but she thinks that in some countries we cannot use them, and we should look at local, not at so broad context, so broad theories, but more local solutions. I think that is the first question. And the second was a comment for the conference that we should have simultaneous translation, especially because she thinks that the communications in Spanish were also interesting for the people that don't speak Spanish. So we can improve next time. So thank you for the suggestion.
Thanks for the translation, Marta. I'm glad it's a free translation. Thank you so much for that. And thank you very much for the question. On the second one, Philip and I will talk about this, and it's an important point. So thank you for raising it, and thank you also for your question. Yeah, I fully agree. There's different views on how we can move to fill what Oren Young calls the Anthropocene governance gap. I mentioned Robin Eckersley. She's a big proponent of greening the state, but transforming the state. So it's a different type of state, okay? One that, as we mentioned earlier, can fund the Green New Deal. And I think we do need a strong green state, because while there's been a lot of investment in low carbon energy technologies in the UK, okay, the fact is business will invest only where the risks of losing in the investment are relatively low and the likelihood of profits is high. Now that leaves a whole gap of actions that are desirable from an environmental standpoint where business will not invest, and only the state has the economic power and the means to underwrite, to make investments themselves and to guarantee and underwrite investments from private business. We do need a strong state, in my humble opinion. But simultaneously, I fully agree that there does need to be a shift of governance to the local level. You know, a top-down centralised state that can only take us so far. Governance needs to move more to the local level. We need a disaggregation of centralised structures, more emphasis on local communities. Local communities know their environment better than those from outside their environment, but often they find their environment is changing because of the action of people and businesses outside their environment that might make a decision, say, to chop down trees for timber, for example. Okay, and so we need some sort of shift of power from the global to the local in order to counter some of these unsustainable trends, but also have a strong role for government as well, but not government that gets in the way of the local. Thanks again for the question, and thanks for the suggestion. Thank you.
Sorry. My name is Sabit Khan. I'm coming from California. And sort of pigging back with the question the gentleman asked here, as an educator, I sometimes wonder if we're placing too much of an emphasis on beliefs versus action, and also the whole dichotomy between relying on civil society movements. I teach civil society nonprofit. That's been my career for the last 15, 20 years. But a lot of recent movements, including what's happening in the environmental movement, looking at what's going on in Palestine and other movements, have really forced me to re-examine whether we're relying too much on citizen-led movements. Are we putting too much pressure there versus relying on politics? And as you rightly said, advocacy and maybe even at the global level, enforcements, very strict enforcements at the global level. So even sovereign states do not, as we are seeing with ICJ and other incidents, maybe perhaps we need that kind of a political will globally to say, okay, these are the bad actors, we need to control them. So I was wondering, these are just reflections, but I'd love to hear your comments.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Firstly, the work that's done in civil society is tremendously important. We couldn't do without it. I think the problem is one of participation. How well can civil society movements permitted to engage in politics at the national level? There's a difference between sort of, if you like, consultation, whereby groups are consulted, and when they actually participate, when there's a qualitative opportunity to affect outcomes. And it's that latter part. We have consultation, but without really effective participation. How do we shift towards that? Well, it's a difficult one, because the main structures, World Bank, as you mentioned yesterday, is dominated by the main shareholder, which is the United States. So we're not going to shift that particular global structure, which has a profound effect on environment and development spending in the global south, unless somehow there's a change in the United States. So it's all a question of power and where it's located. On beliefs, yes, you know, the relationship between beliefs and actions is hugely important. And part of the problem, one of the reasons we have uncertainty on climate change is precisely because there is an active denial movement that tries to undermine people's beliefs on the scientific evidence. So you know, beliefs matter, and if those beliefs are undermined, it will impede effective action. Thanks for the question.
David, thank you very much. The presentation gave me a lot to think about. A lot to think about in teaching environmental law at the University of Southern Queensland. My question is, in Queensland we have a number of conservative politicians, and I'm sure this is the same in a number of other countries, who are highly critical of closing down of the few remaining coal-fired power stations we have in Australia, and commenting on the fact that India and China are opening up, coal-fired power stations, 1 or 2 a week, on average. And thinking through that issue, I mean, I think about the, economic issues of, well, closing down the power stations provide us with, we're preparing for the longer term. We're dealing with opportunity cost, taking a short-term hit for a long-term gain. They're not. But I'm sort of conscious that there may be more to it than that. How would you respond to politicians that, that I am experiencing in Queensland, Australia, where they're saying it's crazy for us to be closing down coal-fired power stations when India and China are opening up 1 or 2 on average per week?
Yeah, good question, Rhett, and thanks very much for your presentation. Yes, again, yesterday on the sustainability constitutionalism. Really thoroughly enjoyed that. I think I'm going to make reference here to my mentor at the Open University, Andrew Blowers, who pioneered very much environmental teaching at the OU, and who took me under his wing when I joined the Open University in the mid-1990s. He argued that there's a relationship between intra-generational inequity, in other words, injustice and unfairness within the present generation, and intergenerational equity. And he argues that because, no matter how strong our moral and principled beliefs may be, we will not really be able to think of the long term while there's injustices in the present generation. While there's poverty, while people are living, an increasing number of people are living in the UK, are living in houses that are poorly heated because they can't afford the bills, things like this. If we want to deal with the long-term environmental problems, we've first got to address inequalities in the present generation, both within countries, between different groups, in society, but also, as your question acknowledged, internationally, because I hear that what you've said about India and China. Why should we reduce our emissions when their emissions? I don't know who the they is, but this is the argument as it's articulated. When the emissions of India and China are increasing, so again, that's a problem. That's a problem of inequality. Okay, I would say that what we should really be doing is finding out, from a scientific standpoint, find out what the carrying capacity of the atmosphere is. How much carbon dioxide can we emit into the atmosphere a year? And then try to apportion that fairly around the world. The principle's easy to imagine, but the implementation is fiendishly difficult. Apportion those emissions fairly around the world on an annual basis that takes account of historical responsibility, i.e. the global north, responsibility for climate change, and which enables countries such as India and China also to realise their economic aspirations. That will make a more equal global society, which might make us better able to deal with the long-term problems. Thanks for the question.
I think there's space for one more. The microphone is already there. Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. Sherwin Weech, Arden University in the United Kingdom. And
You're from
Arden, yes.
Okay.
This is more a observation touching on Malcolm, the gentleman here, and also the legal aspects of it. We spoke about globalization and looking for a local but also looking for a global solution. The SDGs were made by the United Nations. And I know we spoke about looking at NPOs. However, in terms of locus standi, from the legal perspective, the SDGs were developed by the General Assembly, went adopted, and we could actually, through the use of NPOs, engage directly and ask for advisory opinion from the ICJ, which would be binding upon states, which are all members. This was done in 1996 with the advice given by the ICJ with regards to nuclear disarmament. and the use of nuclear weapons. And the ICJ held in its advisory opinion that states have a legal and moral responsibility to do at least the least amount of harm on the environment. And this was subsequently upheld in 2010 with Argentina and Uruguay with the pulp mills case, where Uruguay wanted to build 2 pulp mills along the Uruguay River, and Argentina took it to the ICJ, and the ICJ said, nope, you actually need to look after the environment that you operate in. So in that way there, what are your thoughts of actually holding states liable through an advisory opinion, but even though we know international law in itself is not actually law, but more so a accepted norm?
Great. Thanks for the question. The do no harm principle is obviously hugely important, and it shouldn't just apply to the nuclear field, it should apply more broadly. Your question made me think about, do no harm with respect to the environment. We've spoken this morning about rights of nature. Well, what happens if you violate rights? I'm not talking about rights of nature, but just imagine if we violate someone's right by committing a crime. Okay, that is a crime to violate rights. And the crime in question here is ecocide, the work of Polly Higgins. Her work on ecocide is, in a sense, that's the crime when nature's rights are violated. Now, I do know, and I don't know enough about this, but I do know there is a movement to have ecocide recognised as a crime by the International Criminal Court of Justice. If that happens, then that could be a game changer, because we won't just be talking about changing law within countries, such as Bolivia and Ecuador. We'll be talking about a change to international law, which could have a profound effect on global environmental governance. So, thank you.
So, thank you. I think we are on time, as in Portugal, we always have it on time. So, as yesterday, there's a coffee break on the other department, so it will be a nice walk at the sun. We see each other there. The rest of the morning will be there, and then there's a plenary in the afternoon here after some sessions. So today we will have 2 walks.